Today, we're looking at a deeply fascinating yet kind of misunderstood trait. We're talking about the fiercely independent people among us. You know the exact type, right? The folks who seemingly handle absolutely everything on their own. They never skip a beat, and they just carry the weight of the world without making a single sound. We are going straight into the psychology of the ultimate do-it-yourselfer.
So I want to start by asking you to do a little bit of self-reflection here. What is your very first move when things go wrong? Seriously, think about it. When a crisis hits, or a big project falls apart, or you're suddenly hit with this wave of unexpected stress, what does your immediate knee-jerk response actually look like? Well, for most people, a crisis prompts an outward response. They pick up their phone to call a friend, or maybe they text a group chat to find someone who's been through the exact same thing. But for a certain type of person, the reaction is entirely different. Actually, their first move is to just open a new browser tab. They don't call anyone. They just quietly, in total solitary silence, start figuring it out. And the crazy thing is, they usually do. That brings us to Section 1, the solo superpower myth. From the outside, this extreme independence looks like an absolute superpower. Society is constantly praising it as this strong personality trait, the mark of a truly capable person. But let's look at how this actually plays out in the real world. Do any of these sound like you, or maybe someone you know? It's the person who spends an entire weekend agonizingly teaching themselves a complex new skill just because calling a professional felt, well, harder than learning it from scratch. It's the person who processes a devastating breakup entirely alone, only to show up to brunch 2 weeks later acting totally fine. Or maybe it's the person who types a text starting with, "Hey, can I ask you for some help?" and then deletes the whole thing before hitting send. And not just once, but regularly, for years. Now, before we dig into the deeper psychology here, I really want to validate this behavior. Because this isn't just about being damaged or broken. People who learn to figure things out alone have built something incredibly valuable. When things break materially, emotionally, or relationally, they don't rely on whoever's nearby to study them. They hold themselves through it. They have this massive tolerance for difficulty. And you know what? That is real, undeniable strength. Moving on to Section 2, compulsive self-reliance explained. Okay, so we know it's a strength, but where does this intense urge to do everything completely alone actually come from? Because these aren't just quirky little personality traits. The foundational psychologist John Bowlby actually identified the specific pattern, and he called it compulsive self-reliance. This emerges when an early environment repeatedly teaches a child that reaching outward for support doesn't reliably produce it. Maybe the adults in their life were inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes totally unreachable, or maybe a core need was met with frustration, or worse, just total silence. So what happens when a child faces that kind of inconsistency? Well, the brain simply does its job. It adapts. The distress signal literally stops routing outward. Instead of crying out for help, the brain learns to process the distress internally. At the time, it's this absolutely brilliant survival mechanism. The problem is, the brain just keeps doing that for the next 30, 40, or 50 years. Let's look at Section 3, the metacognition trap. See, all that internal processing, it doesn't come for free. There is a massive hidden cognitive burden that these do-it-yourselfers carry around silently every single day. These individuals have extremely high metacognitive activity, which basically means they obsessively think about their own thinking. Here's how it goes. Step 1, they catch their emotional reaction mid-flight. Step 2, they step outside of themselves to examine it. Step 3, they run these quiet, invisible postmortems on decisions they made weeks ago. And finally, Step 4, by the time they've actually processed a feeling, they've revised it internally so many times that it feels completely unshareable. And I think this brilliantly illustrates why they stay so quiet. Trying to translate those highly processed internal thoughts into words for someone else, it just feels horribly reductive. It's kind of like trying to describe a beautiful sweeping piece of music by just reading out the raw sheet music notes. Something essential gets completely lost in translation. So rather than feeling like they're giving someone a pale, fake version of their real feelings, they just say nothing at all.
This brings us to Section 4, when habit becomes identity.
Now, this is where a brilliantly adaptive coping mechanism starts to become genuinely dangerous. It happens gradually, usually without any big defining moment, but the shift is profound. Over time, figuring things out alone stops being just a behavior, and it morphs into an identity. I handle my own stuff. That becomes a calcified internal belief. And once this happens, accepting help doesn't just feel unnecessary. It feels like a direct contradiction to who they fundamentally are. it clashes with their entire self-concept. It creates this fascinating paradox. The person who stubbornly refuses to ask for physical directions is the exact same person who literally cannot ask for emotional support when they're crumbling inside. It's the same room, the same locked door, and it forces us to ask, do they even still have the key to open it? What this produces in real-world relationships is incredibly painful. Loved ones can sense the warmth, they know the care is there, but there is always this persistent feeling that the last 10%, that final sliver of true closeness, is always just slightly out of reach. An invisible door closes. And what's really heartbreaking is that the person on the inside feels that 10% gap just as clearly as the person on the outside. They just don't know how to cross it anymore. The walls built to protect them are now keeping out the exact support they secretly crave.
Section 5. The expiration of survival mode. If you're resonating with this, or maybe you love someone who does, I really want you to lean into this next part, because this isolation absolutely does not have to be permanent. Consider this profound realization. Survival mechanisms don't come with expiration dates. They function continuously. Your brain is essentially running a program on autopilot. It is frantically protecting you against threats, inconsistent adults, unmet needs, that haven't actually been real for decades. It's still running simply because nobody told it to stop.
So, ask yourself right now, is your fierce self-reliance actively being chosen by the adult you are today, or is it running completely automatically, written in a totally different era of your life? A really practical framework for identifying this is to just pause the next time you feel the urge to isolate and ask, is there a real threat of abandonment right now, or is this just an echo from the past? If it's an echo, it's a past survival habit, not a necessity. Looking honestly at this is step 1 toward lowering those walls. Because the truth is, the need for human connection didn't just evaporate. It stopped knocking, sure, but it didn't stop wanting to come in. That deep desire for someone to just understand you is still very much alive inside you. To start lowering these walls and building trust in your relationships, you have to do it incrementally. A great specific strategy here is allowing a loved one to see you before you fully processed a problem. Just let them sit in the messiness with you, even if you don't have all the answers mapped out yet.
Let's look at Section 6, externalizing your mental backlog.
When all that internal processing turns into a looping trap, you really need practical, daily actions to get out of your own head. The goals here are straightforward. Reset your focus, get your sleep back under control, and clear that mental backlog through externalization. You can start with simple daily exercises to practice asking for just tiny amounts of support. Seriously, try texting one friend to ask for a minor favor, like a coffee order, or verbalize just one small daily frustration out loud to your partner. It bypasses the overwhelm and gives you a small, safe way to practice letting people in. And that brings us to our final provocative thought for this explainer. You are not just a static personality type. You have a history. But unlike a personality trait, a history is allowed to end differently than it started. Since your history is not your personality, how will you choose to let this story end? Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep reflecting and keep learning.